In the early hours of February 24, 2022, the world awoke to images that would define a new chapter in global history. Russian tanks rolled across the Ukrainian border. Explosions lit up the skies above Kiev, Kharkiv, and Mariupol. The invasion had begun. Yet, as shocking as the attack was, this conflict did not emerge overnight. It is the culmination of centuries of history, unresolved tensions from the collapse of empires, the scars of the Cold War, and the turbulent politics of the 21st century. To understand the war in Ukraine, we must journey backward, into the shadows of history, before we can grasp the complexity of today's crisis, and the role that figures like Donald Trump played in shaping its course. The roots stretch deep into the soil of Eastern Europe. Ukraine, once known as the breadbasket of Europe, has long been fought over by great powers. In the 9th century, the medieval state of Kievan Rus rose on these lands, laying the foundation for both Russian and Ukrainian national identities. Centuries later, Ukraine fell under the domination of empires: Polish, Lithuanian, Austro-Hungarian, and most importantly Russian. By the 18th century, Catherine the Great had absorbed much of Ukraine into the Russian Empire, binding its destiny to Moscow. But this imperial embrace was never gentle. Ukrainian language and culture were suppressed. Rebellions were crushed. And in the 20th century, under Joseph Stalin, Ukraine endured one of the darkest tragedies in its history: the Holodomor, a man-made famine that killed millions. For many Ukrainians, this became the symbol of Moscow's cruelty and a reason to seek independence at any cost. That independence finally came in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed. Ukraine, along with 14 other republics, declared sovereignty. For the first time in centuries, Kyiv ruled itself. But independence came with dangerous uncertainties. The Soviet Union's collapse left Ukraine with the world's third-largest stockpile of nuclear weapons. In 1994, Ukraine agreed to give them up under the Budapest Memorandum, in exchange for security guarantees from Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Russia promised to respect Ukraine's sovereignty and borders. 2 decades later, that promise was broken. The post-Soviet years were marked by corruption, fragile democracy, and power struggles. Yet one issue divided Ukraine more than any other: its future path. Would Ukraine turn west, aligning itself with NATO and the European Union? Or would it remain within Russia's orbit? The answer to that question has fueled every crisis since. In 2014, when Ukrainians protested for closer ties to Europe during the Maidan Revolution, Russia responded with force. Vladimir Putin annexed Crimea, a bold move that shocked the world and violated international law. Russian-backed separatists seized control of parts of eastern Ukraine, igniting a bloody conflict in Donbass. The war had begun years before the full-scale invasion. But the seeds of today's tragedy were already sown. As the conflict simmered, American politics became entangled with Ukraine in unexpected ways. In 2016, Donald Trump was elected President of the United States, promising a new approach to Russia. Trump's critics accused him of being unusually sympathetic to Vladimir Putin. Supporters argued he was a realist, seeking to avoid endless confrontation. But Ukraine soon became central to one of the most controversial episodes of his presidency. In 2019, a whistleblower revealed a phone call between Trump and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump had pressed Zelensky to investigate Joe Biden, his political rival, and Biden's son Hunter. Military aid to Ukraine, aid desperately needed to defend against Russia, was temporarily withheld. This led to Trump's first impeachment. For many in Kyiv, this was a troubling signal. Ukraine's survival had become a bargaining chip in U.S. domestic politics. For Moscow, it was an opportunity. Meanwhile, Putin was preparing. Russian troops massed along the border. Propaganda painted Ukraine as a Nazi state, an existential threat to Russia. Diplomats warned of war, but many in the West doubted Putin would take the risk of a full-scale invasion. Then, on that February morning in 2022, he proved them wrong. The invasion shocked the world but also revealed Putin's miscalculations. He believed Kyiv would fall within days. Instead, Ukrainian resistance was fierce. Ordinary citizens took up arms. President Zelensky refused to flee, declaring, "I need ammunition, not a ride." Western nations rallied behind Ukraine with sanctions on Russia, weapons, and billions in aid. NATO, once thought weakened, found renewed purpose. Yet the war dragged on, becoming one of the largest and bloodiest conflicts in Europe since World War II. As the war escalated, Donald Trump, no longer in the White House but still a powerful political force, continued to shape the debate. He criticized U.S. aid to Ukraine, suggested he could negotiate an end to the war in 24 hours, and often spoke about his relationship with Putin. For his supporters, this was evidence of strength. For his critics, it raised fears of what a second Trump presidency might mean for Ukraine's survival. The war is not just about land. It is about the future of the international order. Can nations change borders by force? Or will democratic alliances hold firm against aggression? From the trenches of Bakhmut to the corridors of Washington and Brussels, the struggle continues. And yet, history whispers warnings. The jury of world opinion is still out. In Athens 2,000 years ago, juries of citizens determined the fate of individuals. Today, the fate of nations lies before a far greater jury, the global community. Will Ukraine's fight for freedom inspire unity, or will fatigue, misinformation, and political division erode support? Already, deep fakes and social media manipulation shape narratives of the war. Already, cracks appear in alliances. And already, figures like Donald Trump loom over the future, their choices capable of reshaping the battlefield as much as any tank or missile. This is not just Ukraine's war. It is a test of principles born from centuries of history, the right of nations to be free, the balance of power in Europe, and the fragile promise made in 1994 that sovereignty would be protected. The story of Russia and Ukraine is still being written. Its roots run deep into the past, but its consequences stretch far into the future. The question that remains, the question that keeps leaders awake at night, is this: how will it end? With peace or with escalation? With a free Ukraine or a divided land? With the return of order or the collapse of a system built after World War II? As history has shown, wars rarely end as they begin. And as the world watches, one truth becomes clear: the outcome will not only shape Ukraine, it will shape us all. History is full of battles, but the greatest one is keeping their stories alive. Subscribe, share, and like now. Never miss the moments that change the world.